When thinking about the great flood of Noah, as recorded in Genesis chapters 6 through 9, some people react very negatively. And many of those folks react this way because they have a deep sense of fairness and compassion. And they're swayed by the arguments of Bible critics like Richard Dawkins, who assert that God is mean and vindictive. After all, on the face of it, it can seem like a terrible thing for God to completely eliminate all but 8 members of the human race, along with all animal, reptile, bird, and insect life. To a lot of people, that seems Hitler-esque or Stalin-esque, maybe even on the level of criminal insanity. And yet the Bible speaks of this catastrophic event as a matter of course, something that was well known, widely believed, and accepted. So are Richard Dawkins and others like him correct that God is hateful, vindictive, and genocidal? I actually think that's a fair question. I think it's fair because in the experience of most of us, we have never met people who are so evil that they must be exterminated to prevent them from corrupting everyone and everything around them. So it's hard for many people to conceive of anyone, much less the entire human race, reaching that level of depravity. On the other hand, there are people who have lived with sadists, malignant narcissists, toxic sociopaths, and psychopaths. Others have been victims of gang violence, brutal rape, and other despicable crimes. For those people, the flood might make a little more sense because they understand that some human beings can degenerate so far that there is little or no goodness left in them. But the whole human race sunk beyond the point of redemption, that's a little hard for almost anyone nowadays to wrap their head around. Yet this is what the Bible claims the world was like in the time of Noah. Now, according to Genesis 6, the flood happened because the human race was moving very quickly beyond the point of no return. Ever since Adam and Eve walked away from God in the garden, God's plan was to redeem the descendants of Adam and Eve. Genesis 4 and 5 record the sad account of the degradation of the human race and its determination to corrupt everything that God had created. Adam and Eve had 2 sons, Cain and Abel. Cain killed Abel out of a deep resentment toward God. Another son was born, named Seth. Seth wanted to follow God, but over several generations, the evil line of Cain consistently corrupted the godly line of Seth. The Bible seems to imply that the corruption was not only moral and spiritual, but genetic as well. The Bible specifically says that in those days, the sons of God mated with human women. Now, there's been a lot of debate about what is meant by the term sons of God. Personally, I'm convinced that in this context, it describes angelic, spiritual type beings who could manifest themselves in some sort of human form and interbreed with women. Those unholy and unnatural unions produced hybrid beings who had superhuman abilities. The Bible calls these beings Nephilim, or fallen ones. By the time of Noah, this process had resulted in the genetic corruption of the entire human race. Noah and his family were the only exceptions. And I think this is what it means in Genesis 6:9 when it says that Noah was faultless in his generations. That is, he was uncorrupted in his bloodline. Not only humans, but it seems probable that animals were also being genetically corrupted. Now, this is only a possibility, but it could be why there are so many images of half-human, half-animal creatures in ancient art. The conventional explanation for this is that these images are just symbolic of some religious ideas. But on the other hand, it may be depicting creatures that actually existed. And I realize that this is a very startling concept, but in some ways it does seem to fit the evidence presented in the biblical account, along with the legends and artwork of ancient peoples. In any case, something so terrible, so unthinkable, so irreversible had happened by Noah's time that God had to wipe out everything that drew breath and start over. Besides the Genesis account, there are other verses in the Bible that refer to the story of Noah. And these passages generally use the story of Noah as an example of how God can be forced to judge wickedness when it reaches a point of no return. Why? because not to intervene would allow the human race and all of creation to sink into a living hell. Now, this is something that Richard Dawkins and others like him seem to overlook. As proof that God is hateful, they point not only to the flood, but also to God's command that Israel wipe out the ancient Canaanites and Amorites from the land of promise when they invaded it. Yet the Bible explains that these people had so given themselves over to demonic worship that they were irredeemable. That is why centuries before the Israelite invasion, when Abraham lived in Canaan as a nomad, God told him that his descendants would eventually possess the land. But he was also told that this possession would not be until many years into the future because, in the words of Genesis 15:16, the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. And that makes you wonder about our own times, doesn't it? We have not yet suffered this level of judgment because we are not wholly corrupt. Yet our society does seem to be slipping ever more rapidly down that dark slope that can only end in despair and destruction. God's patience has its limits, and rightly so. And if you read the chapters right after the flood account, Genesis 10 and 11, you will see that within just a few generations, the human race was added again. Only 10 generations after the flood, the human race had slipped again into demonic worship and unspeakable practices like child sacrifice. And that is why God called Abraham in Genesis 12 to be the father of a line of people through whom he would redeem the earth and end wickedness forever. And of course, that came through Jesus Christ. This is Dr. Michael Bogart with Aspect Ministries and the Unexpected Bible YouTube channel. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel. We really need subscribers to get to that monetization level. And I will make other videos in this amazing series on Noah and what Noah's flood means for us today. See you then.